Right, I'm late, let's go. So that's me. I'm working at Canonical, packaging LibreOffice for Ubuntu, and also am in the board of directors for the Document Foundation. And well, let's go back to 2010, because that was when the whole thing started with the new build system, new back then. And I wanted to just have a look at what we thought we would do back then, and how we thought we could improve stuff back then, and what we actually achieved from that. So, yeah, that was one of the original slides from the Open Office conference in 2010, except that it didn't have this branding, but well, that was the goal back then. And for the most part, I think we achieved that. But it might not look like that if you're building LibreOffice now, but you have to think about how OpenOffice was building at the time. And there were many things that were broken there. There were manual dependencies, there were incomplete dependencies, there were incompatible builds, which means that you could build one part and you had to know which part would change if you changed that, and if you didn't, horrible things would happen, and all kinds of other issues. So those were the goals we had back then. Actually, I thought by now we would all use 32 core machines, and but that didn't happen. By now we just use all very nifty laptops. But the other things still are true, and are things that we very much profit from now. And if you use LibreOffice now and think, well, LibreOffice is still slow, that was the comparison from just building a few modules. That was back then, and it's pretty much the same like that now, except that we almost take as much for a standard run of these modules, because we run all the tests by default all the time, or lots of them. So we got a lot faster, and then we added lots of tests that you can't disable, so that we are back as slow as we were before, unless you know how to trick around that, but I'm not going to tell you. So one other goal of this was to not repeat yourself. One other goal of this was to not repeat yourself, because repeating yourself is stupid, and especially if you're in the build system, you have multiple things that tell you how to build something. There can again be inconsistencies and stuff that can create issues. For comparison, this is how it is in LibreOffice right now. You register, and if you want to have a new library there, you put it somewhere which says in the repository MK, which essentially says where it should end up in the final build, and well, then you say how to build it. Like, I want to build these C++ files. In the old Open Office world, well, it was a bit different. So that was one of the issues we had with the old stuff. The other thing was TIMTOWTDI, so there's more than one way to do it. And well, that's always a bad thing, because you have to know all of them to read actually what others are doing. And again, by now, if you want to, for example, export a symbol in LibreOffice, you do something simple like this. You add something DLL public to the declaration, and then the symbol is exported. In OpenOffice, yeah, you could have multiple ways to do that, and every one would cause interesting, slightly different effects. So again, it was troublesome. Oops, same slide. So this was the initial implementation of the back then, new build system, where we had all these targets in one huge dependency tree. And that meant that we were aware of all the stuff that was happening in all the build. We didn't have like these horizon effects where you would do an incompatible build, which meant you built something and said, I'm pretty sure this is binary compatible with the rest, and trust me. And it actually knew if it was binary compatible or not. And most of the stuff, so the core stuff of this is still like that today. A few things changed, like the backwards compatibility is gone. We don't need like to deliver and copy stuff 5 times around. We needed to do that in the old OpenOffice build system to be compatible with the old build system. So thanks to all these guys who helped contributing to this. The important quote here is, I say we take off and nuke the entire site from orbit. It's the only way to be sure. That was the last comment when we killed the last part of the old build system. So that needed to be in the commit message there. So with this, we had the whole build system on essentially on one build system, and not like we had before, 2 or rather 3, like the old one, the new one, and the one that mixed everything between those, which was some ugly Perl hackery. And then I got bored, and I wondered if I could do more than the stuff that I originally planned for the new build system. And one of the things was, well, actually syntax highlighting and using IDEs is a pretty good thing, but it's hard to like manually tell your IDE where all the include paths are and things like that. On the other hand, well, we can't just say use Visual Studio and then we build everything with Visual Studio, because that's kind of hard on Linux and on other platforms. So using just an IDE as the main build system doesn't work. But what we could do is have the normal cross-platform build that we had before, and export solutions to different IDEs so they could be using this to give you syntax highlighting, debugging, and stuff like that. So the first I did was kdevelop, because, well, it seemed to be easy to me. And again, as I said, that was not something that was initially planned. It was like an afterthought. So what it did was you did a make np, which prints out all the build information, and then it parsed that and tried to build the IDE solution from that. Turns out that something as simple as make np isn't really stable over different versions of make. So the parser for this turned to be, it always added more stuff, and I looked at this and this is not good. We're taking more time to parse actually the info than is actually in there. And the result was always flaky because people were using different versions of make, and it was kind of tricky to use this in a reliable way. And the goal of this was to have people who were new to development to get it on an IDE. And well, if the first thing they do is failing and they need a full build to get there, that kind of sucks. So I now reorganized that and did all the tricky stuff in the build system itself, and then it just dumps that in JSON, so that a simple Python script can read that and translate that to whatever IDE you want to have. So this is the solution right now, and I think it mostly is reliable. And we can look here. Right, there was a question from, where's Jan? Is Jan here? No. Nope. Jan asked me, well, I looked at the files and the compiler switches. Whoops. the wrong slide, that actually are given to compile a C++ file on Windows, and almost all the stuff, all the data about what definitions and flags and stuff are to be used for this target are in the JSON file, with a few exceptions, and this is what he was asking about. And that's a few things still missing. That is like generally config specific stuff, like which flags to use for exceptions and stuff like that, which is not target specific. So when he wrote this email, should they have been in the JSON? I said, well, no, because they are configuration specific and they are the same for the whole build. But maybe I should just drop a JSON file next to it, which contains all this info, so that you can actually from the JSON file find out all the flags that were used to build this on your specific platform. So which IDEs do we have? Well, Kdevelop, that was me in the beginning. Then Honsa did Visual Studio, and Jan and others did additions to that. Xcode was, I think, initially done by Tor, and then a lot of work by Jan. So we have like the major platform, major IDEs for each platform being able to work on LibreOffice code in the natively feeling environment. And we have Vim and uCompletely by Moggy for the old Unix guys who wouldn't use anything newer. And well, we have Qt Creator, and actually one of the Qt Creator guys came up to me. He can't attend this talk, but he said, well, I really want to help out, so we should get in contact with them and get Qt Creator to be nicely integrated with that. So the past was what I aimed to do with the original new build system 8 years ago, and this IDE stuff is just like a nice additional feature. And there were like the ideas to maybe after 8 years we should again use a new build system, just cause. And well, I felt like the old Unix guy that said, no, not with me. But there's this thing, if you work too long on something, that maybe you're not entirely well, neutral on this. So when I said, well, you should never look at this, I looked. The next thing I did was look actually how much of this build system was actually done by me. And hey, good news, although I wrote the original stuff, there are other guys who do own a lot more lines of it by now than me, so it's not mine anymore. Great. David, Michael, congratulations, you own this thing now. So again, and also the distribution of so this is the lines of code and who last touched them. And it's pretty even distributed, and there are a lot of people touching lots of areas there. So looking forward to using something completely different. These were the original problems we tried to solve with 8 years ago when we did this. Some of the stuff creeped back in. I think cargo code programming is already in the makefiles is again on the rise because, well, it's been 8 years and stuff collected in there. But in general, the other stuff is mostly reached. And I would add one more thing, the two that I spoke about. Do not repeat yourself, and don't do TIMTOWTDI. And that's one of the main arguments against something like let's use Visual Studio directly and then like export that to somewhere else.
Can you please explain TIMTOWTDI?
There's more than one way to do it. So again, I'm kind of reluctant to use something like Visual Studio Solutions directly and then have to maintain different build systems on all platforms, because that will always break and there's more than one truth to the build. So someone does something on Windows and then he changed the solution files but not the stuff for the other platforms and stuff like that. So that unless you find a way to synchronize all this, is really tricky. The other challenges, so I think we should stay with something that is one single build system, whatever that is. And well, the other stuff like having auto-generated intermediates, who here uses automake and autoconf and loves it? You're loving it? Okay. We gotta talk. The other stuff is, well, custom targets, like again, this is having more custom stuff in the build targets, which is not like the usual cross-platform stuff. And the degrees of freedom in...
I have a data point to add to you.
Oh, great. Later.
We started a CI job to do random config and see if they pass the configure phase. Right? You can build a thing by just random config.
Uh-huh.
And the last number is, I run that once a day, at night, just for fun. And 79 failure, 11 success so far.
Uh-huh, right. So we have way too much degrees of freedom in the configuration, especially on Windows, where there should be pretty much only one, mostly. And so that's a goal again to get away from the build system. And that means, for example, well, the candidates for this are obviously CMake, or maybe use Scheme in Make as a migration path. But the advantage there is not to rewrite everything from scratch again, but to softly migrate to it. But the most interesting issue probably is the build execution, because Ninja is a lot faster than what we have now, because Make is just awfully slow parsing all the dependency files that we have, which are just huge.
So,
yeah?
You do a lot of those. Yes, when you do a no-up build, the speed of Make is important. But when you build real thing all the time, what really matters today is not so much the build time, is the reminding problem with files and we do it.
Yeah.
We do have external that still run with -J1 because they're still broken and still can build parallel. And we have a lot of tests, and some of them are really not balanced, and they have a long tail. And we spend quite a lot of time where we have only one core, two core use of the 32 that you hope we have, and we do have.
Yeah.
We don't really use them. So right now there is probably 30% of elapsed time that could be gained just by having the thing back properly.
I mostly agree, but I mean, I want to fight against my inner feeling that everything is fine. So
is 30 seconds.
Yeah.
They optimize to 15 seconds.
But if I look at all these,
10 minutes. So.
if I look at all these things, probably Ninja is the first most useful things of trying to attack within these, rather than the others.
The 1% of your problem.
Yes.
You can optimize that to that. You still have 99% of your problem.
So the externals are actually, yeah, interesting. All right. Anyone else but Norbert having questions? Yes?
How much is actually gbuild generally usable for other software projects? How much LibreOffice specific is it?
Well, there is somewhere deep inside is something that is generally usable, but you will have trouble finding it if you're not knowing about LibreOffice, because there are these things like these multiple layers of where to put libraries and stuff that we are actually not using that much anymore, but they are still in there. I think Miklos once did an experiment to just get the build system out of LibreOffice and then try to get rid of all the LibreOffice specific stuff. So it was just one huge build system that built Hello World. But
that's the part where, unless you have something very complex and very big, it's probably not worth the effort.
Yeah. Also, there are lots of optimizations that you probably only need if you're as big as LibreOffice, like precompiled headers on Windows, having all this parallelization and
the library checks do not link against libraries that did not change their public API.
Right. So stuff like that, and having, for example, GCC creates the dependency files. Those are huge. They're too huge to be just, well, normally you would just use all of them, parse all of them, and be fine. Well, that doesn't work for LibreOffice. So we are taking all these dependency files and pre-parsing them and kicking out all the stuff that is actually superficial and stuff like that. So if your project doesn't need 20 minutes on a 32-core machine.
Yeah, but then most people don't have a 32-core machine, and so the build still takes 20 minutes. But then
right. Like so you're absolutely invited to look into the stuff. Yeah. It's luckily not only me who knows about how this stuff works, which is good. And well, feel free to take a look at it. I'm looking forward for contributions.
If you build like 20 minutes on a 1.4 and that's all you have, 1.4, 20 minutes, this is not going to help you because all it did was simplify how to run and parallelize it. We did a great progress in that compared to before. But it's really helping when you have actually 34 to feed. The rest of it is not really speed.
Yeah, so again, in the comparison to the old build system, the most important thing was not even the speed. That was also important, but more important was getting rid of all the craft that was in the old stuff that collected over 20 years.
The speed we got out of that is that all of a sudden we could do a partial build. I mean,
yeah.
That worked.
Right. The partial build meaning that you touched one file and says it would do an incremental build and actually would work, because that didn't work in the old OpenOffice build system. You would touch one file and everything would be broken most of the time. Okay, I think I'm over time already, yes. Thank you.